Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by composer Nicholas Britell, a 7-time Emmy nominee and a past winner, and a 3-time Emmy nominee this year for both Succession and Andor. Nicholas, congratulations on those Emmy nominations. That's pretty great. Obviously, you had a big year, so that's great.
Thank you so much.
I want to start a little with Succession, then we'll talk about Andor as well.
Sure.
I feel like the whole show ended on such a great note, and your score the whole season was like leveled up from even from the great work you've done previously. I know you're nominated for Connor's Wedding, which is a great episode, one of the best episodes of the show, and certainly in the season. When you get that and have to figure out what the score will sound like for Logan's death, and I think on the soundtrack it's like Phone Call obviously is like the kind of
Mm.
main part of that. How
Mhm.
did you kind of think of it and making it sound both in keeping with the Succession score that we know and also different and original in like coming up with like this new piece of music basically?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was interesting going into each season. Actually, there are certain things that I talked to Jesse Armstrong and that I know about going in, and then there are quite a few things that I actually like to not know about because I think it's really obviously you need a way to get into something and to start structuring the work, but at the same time, I think as a composer, it's really wonderful to get surprised and sort of to be the audience in a sense and sort of feel what is the show doing and get that sense right away. So on season 4, I knew Logan was going to die in episode 3. I knew that. I knew some of the ever increasingly complicated and painful, evolutions of Shiv and Tom's relationship. I knew some of those things, but for example, I didn't know how the season ended. So I was thinking about Logan's death because obviously it's such a monumental part of the history of this show and the story and what was going to happen. And I wrote some music, sort of imagining it after the conversations with Jesse. And then when I finally saw episode 3, first off, I was just blown away with the performances. I thought they were spectacular, and I was so moved by them. And it was that phone call sequence in particular where I realized that there was nothing that I'd ever done for Succession that would work for that sequence. It really required a totally kind of new sound. And the way I would talk about it actually is a lot of the music in Succession that I write it's in a sense it almost sort of sits like it's sort of like 30,000 foot looking at all of these characters. There's no particular one theme for any particular character. For example, it's like the music almost is about the show itself a lot of the time and sort of where things are in a kind of a grander and at times absurd kind of sense. But this moment with the phone call, it really needed to be from the kid's POV. I wanted it to be like inside what from the vantage of Kendall and Roman and Shiv, like what were they feeling? And so I actually I had tried all these things out and I was trying to figure out what to do. And I called Jesse and I said, I'm not sure where in the world you are, but please come to New York and sit on this couch and we have to do this together. I really wanted his guidance and how he was thinking about it because there were so many different possible ways to do that sequence. And I just instinctively knew that there was like a choreography we needed to have, in particular, kind of when Kendall goes downstairs to find Shiv, we're in this almost altered state where the music might go away and sort of wash out, and you hear more of the silverware and the clinking of glasses and things, and just the details of how that would go. It felt like it needed this level of like nuance, and so we painstakingly went through that sequence, and the sound that I found was this it's this very raw, almost kind of like sandpapery string sound with these dissonances. And that was something that, I think a lot about emotions, and I think a lot that's so much of, I think, my focus when I'm writing music. And I think in our lives we've all had those moments where you're being told a piece of bad news and it's probably even worse than you can imagine, and yet you sort of don't want to fully acknowledge that. So there's this sort of knowing something's bad, but also the fear of how bad it is, and it's that kind of tension and anxiety that kind of goes into that moment. And it felt like that's how this moment had to feel. That's what they didn't want to know, that Logan was going to die, even though clearly, he was probably dying.
Right.
And so there's that it's an anxiety, it's an unsettling, it's sad, but it's even more unsettling and raw and kind of traumatic. So that was and actually, interestingly, for what it's worth, that what's actually going on in the music there, it actually is those sort of main succession chords with this very scratchy, raw sound with all these added dissonances to it. And I put a sort of an organ underneath it. And then it goes into this sort of, there's some strange electronics in the kind of altered, psychological moments there. And then it winds up back upstairs with these sort of low cellos, and then it sort of vanishes away. So that was really, yeah, to answer your question, long answer, but I mean, there's never really been another cue like that in the show. So that was definitely something quite new for season 4. And then, to answer the other part of the question, just the overall season 4, I think it's been this incredible experience to live with music for, I think it's about 7 years I've worked on the show, and to consistently get to come back to a story and to these characters and think to yourself, okay, what do I do now? So I think each season, I think we all as a team, the crew, the cast, the writer, I think we all kind of kept gaining confidence in the voice that we were working with, in a sense. And every season I sort of pushed myself to try even more things, I guess, to some extent. And by season 4, I think I had there was a sort of sound, a sort of feeling that I would have when I was writing something. I would say, okay, that feels like Succession,
Was it like, I mean, for you, like the feeling I get listening to the score on like Spotify, like which I've been listening to long when it came out. I mean, like just listen to it all summer, basically. It's just the best. Not just go through chatting. I absolutely love it. And I guess like I mean, the show is ultimately, like, I think a tragedy, right? Obviously, like, and I found like a lot of the score this season incredibly sad. Like when you just listen to it detached from like the image and stuff, it is like very moving and very, like, yeah, like just sad, for lack of a better word. And did your process in like the later episodes once you got like the phone call and like Logan's death, basically, did that influence how you wanted the tragedy basically to play out in the score throughout the rest of the season?
For sure. I mean, everything was cumulative, so I'm always kind of learning as I go on these projects, certainly on Succession. I think you're totally right, that over time, I mean, there's a lot of absurdity in the show. There is this great contrast between sort of the high and the low, and the absurdity and the gravitas. I think for me, just personally, as I watch the show and as I've gotten closer to these characters in this world, I feel it sadder and sadder with it. I found it to be profoundly sad, actually, that these people who technically have been given so much are so unable to live their lives in a let's say a more fulfilling manner.
Yeah.
And the pain, the pain that even amidst all the resources the world can offer you, the fact that that they still have so much pain. I find that very sad, and I find it very I find many of those character arcs very tragic, so I sort of respond to that in that way. And I think the music to some extent is that extension of my own take on that. That being said, I talking to Jesse and us always having these conversations, I will always write piece of music and have ideas and instincts. But the wonderful thing about this show is these collaborations, and so all the music, every single note, Jesse and I will talk about every single cue, every episode. I'll do kind of a draft of my ideas for things, and then Jesse will listen to everything and we'll talk. And that's been one of the most wonderful aspects and one of the most wonderful memories of this, is just the way that we've gotten a chance to work together. And so it's certainly my instinct in certain places, and certainly over the course of things, but it's solidified and emphasized and re-emphasized and nurtured by Jesse's own instincts for this too.
Yeah. Last one about Succession, then we'll go to Andor, I promise.
Sure, yeah.
But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the finale. Just again, I love you have a great moment in the finale. It's like, I think it's called It's Done. and you have
Yeah.
this like, it's like when we Kendall and Shiv kind of like finally puts Kendall down, right, basically, and like is gonna vote against him, and then you slowly fade up the Succession theme, right, like probably for the last time it seems, right, as Tom I think is walking on, so because like,
Yeah.
and I just absolutely love that moment. I loved it on the show. I love listening to it just
Thank
standalone. Like, and I guess like, when did you? It's such a great. I just love it. I guess had you kind of like figure out, yes, you'll bring the theme back here, like for the last time, basically, at this great moment.
at this moment. Yeah,
yeah,
it was interesting. There are a lot of these sort of moments of a sort of finality in the sense of this season, and certainly in that episode where you say to yourself, wow, that's the Succession. You sort of go, oh, I guess it's finally happening. And I remember actually that was a piece that I talked with Jesse about extensively, because I actually wasn't sure what it should be there. And I tried a lot of different things. There was a moment where I had, in a sense, a more grave kind of dour piece of music there that sort of says, oh, this is the success, kind of this is Tom. And it was interesting and Jesse really responded. Jesse is absolutely the most supportive and kind collaborator you could imagine, but he really responded not positively to that idea. And he was like, he's so polite. He was like, I really actually think this other direction might be the way to go. And I was like, really? I think, and his instinct was that putting that piece that's there it's kind of one of the more circus-like iterations of the main title concept, and it rhymes with a piece of music that you hear in the pilot, actually. I believe it rhymes with this piece of actually when they're going out to play that terrible softball game. It's a piece of music that sort of rhymes with that. And Jesse's take was that there is this absurd, sad and absurd kind of cycle of life that's happening here, that of course it's Tom who's taking, it's like none of the kids have succeeded. It's Tom who takes over. And what does that say about the world, about corporate culture, about the way that all of these fortunes and are established, and how power sort of solidifies itself. So there was that sense of, I think, there's a dark comic sensibility, I think, with that moment, as well as the sadness, and that piece captured it the best. So that's sort of the answer to how we came to it. It was, there's that feeling of like, oh my God, it's this theme coming back maniacally at this moment. So really, I think for me, there is a sense, I did that more in season 1, but I think sometimes there was a sense of like, when you would ever hear that actual theme, there would be this sense of this sort of maniacal repetition that it can have, so.
Yeah, it's amazing. Really great.
Thank you.
And then moving on to Andor, another great show, an incredible
Thank
score. I love it so much. And you're nominated for the title theme, and then also for dramatic composition for Rick's Road.
Yes.
Going into I mean, I guess just like starting there, like,
yeah,
this is like Star Wars music that I've not heard before, right? Like, it's not, it's like feels completely original, just like the show is very kind of like a different take on the Star Wars that we've seen previously. Yeah, like, how is it like coming, and especially knowing the storied history of Star Wars, like John Williams, and like, obviously, like, it's an incredible, instantly recognizable theme just in general for Star Wars, and the music has its own feel. So how'd you come in and kind of subvert that, and also make it feel like it would be in that world as well? I guess, I don't know, I think you did a great job. So
thank you. I mean, what you're asking is exactly the challenge, in a sense. I think I was obviously, like almost everyone maybe on planet Earth, I've grown up loving Star Wars music, and I think I was 3 when I first saw, I think my parents took me to like Return of the Jedi in the theater, and as a composer too, the John Williams music is I mean, it's really part of like the world's culture, I feel, at this point. It's such a sort of timeless work. So certainly coming into the Star Wars universe, you're thinking about that, but the thing that really gave me confidence, I guess, was the fact that my first conversation with Tony Gilroy, and I'm the hugest Tony Gilroy fan, by the way. I love Michael Clayton's one of my favorite movies, and I was so excited to get to work with him. The first thing he said was that they really wanted a unique sound for Andor. They really wanted to make sure that the music right from the start of season 1 was reflective of the story that was in front of us at that moment, and to carve out this as its own part of the universe, certainly knowing that we know where Andor winds up. I mean, that's the interesting thing with the story, is that we really do know kind of the ending of that, and certainly how it will then continue. But at this early stage in the story, it was so important that it have a distinctive character of its own. And so I just started thinking about, well, what is that? Who is Cassian Andor? And the interesting answer to those kind of early questions was, I don't think he knows who he is. And I think a lot of season one, certainly a lot of the first half of season one, is about him wondering about his past, certainly him wondering about his present, like what is actually going on. And then there's, over the course of season one, this understanding of where might he be headed, like realizing that. And the very start of my exploration was actually the funeral sequence in episode 12, because there was a huge amount of on-camera music in season one, and those were the things that Tony first said we had to figure out, because he said, just practically, we have to film this stuff. So we have to, what do we do? And it was really a question of who are the people on Ferrex? What is this Parisian culture? We talked about how there's sort of a metallurgical construction masonry culture there. We figured out the sound of the time grappler. That's actually we were banging these pipes in Tony's basement, and I was sampling the sound of his pipes and bending them and doing all this stuff. So that's the time grappler. And we codified every single time you hear the time grappler, there's actually a meaning of each of those, clangs that signal what time of day it is to the people of Ferrex. So every single element of the on-camera music we were trying to figure out. The funeral sequence had so many movements to it. There's the sort of tuning up, forming up. There's the procession, figuring out how all these different people through the town are going to wind up on this one road leading up to Marva's eulogy. And all those are all real musicians playing on set, that we so this is all, we really wanted it to feel real. But the idea of the funeral music, that was really my way in. And I remember playing Tony these early ideas for that, and him being really into it. And then that kind of started forming a basis for me to start thinking about, okay, well, this is how season one ends. On camera, like on set. Maybe I can start taking some of these motifs or elements and weave them into episode one, into the score. And I think the most clear place you start hearing it is actually at the end of episode 3. There's that big wraparound sequence, and you see that shot of Marva looking back to Cassian on the ship, and you hear actually a very like that motif that you'll then hear at her funeral in episode 12. So the risk we took was this idea of like, okay, well, we have to do this stuff. We're going to film it. And we hope that by the time we score the whole thing and come back, that it feels right. So you don't, that's a risk. You never know. You hope it's going to work. And I think it did work, and it did connect, and it did feel good in the end. So that was kind of how I got my start. It was very much the on-camera music kind of leading the way. And then thinking about Cassian. And the final thing I would say is thinking about Cassian is actually what directly led into the main title sequence. Was, I didn't actually know what the length of that was going to be. And Tony was very cool. He sort of said, well, what length should the music be? How should this feel? We had a general sense of how long it might be, and we wound up with 35.2 seconds is going to be the main title sequence. And I remember playing Tony this idea, which to me kind of felt like a question. That was my hope was, a totally different universe. But, by contrast, if you hear something like the Succession theme we were talking about, that right away is this very overt, bombastic kind of concept. Andor had to be a totally different type of concept for the theme. That wasn't reflective of Cassian at all, something like that. It actually starts very quietly. There's this like low synth pulse. You're almost like in the darkness, and then a music starts to emerge. It crescendos. You get this huge build, and then all of a sudden it's out again, And to me, I felt like that was kind of a metaphor for Cassian, where he doesn't know who he is. He's going to try to figure it out. A lot, there's going to be some major discoveries along the way, but then right away, something else is going to happen, and we're on to the next episode. So that was kind of this metaphor for that. And what happened was there were so many ways I could orchestrate it. And I remember showing Tony like a very intimate version with close mic'd strings, and I showed Tony a version with these like textural kind of pianos and bells, and then an orchestra. And and we just sort of said, do we have to choose one? What if we just did all these different, and I had only done about 3 versions maybe. And it seemed like an interesting idea, like, oh, let's use the main title as a way to evolve and a way to see where we are in the story and connect us. At about episode 9, I realized the scope of work I had set before myself, because, the score itself was, I mean, I wrote about 7.5 hours of music, and it took about 2 years to do it. And let alone, there's that point at which you say, okay, now I have to write another main title sequence. So it was, Tony and I vastly underestimated how much work the show was going to be. It was probably the right takeaway.
But it ended up paying off because it's amazing. Like, it really is.
Thank you.
So it's great. We have to wrap up. Nicholas Britell, a 3-time Emmy nominee this year, as mentioned, for Succession, Andor for the theme, and Andor for score as well for Rick's Road. Just a great chatting with you about all these projects, and thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Awesome to talk.